Welcome to your Innovation Coffee Break. I'm Vijay Rajendran, Head of Corporate Innovation and Partnerships at 500 Startups Ecosystems Group. We join leaders with unique perspectives in the world of innovation and startups, and in the time you need to sip a cup of coffee, we'll have some unique conversations. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this conversation today. We're excited to be joined today by John Zeratsky, designer and investor. John, also known as Jay-Z, is a designer, investor, and author of multiple books like Sprint and Make Time, and it is a real treat to have him join us. So welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. We can't begin this conversation without sharing a little bit more about, John and his extraordinary journey. John, can you share with folks about the path you've taken, from designer to Google to GV, and then to your current role?
Yeah. I was a kid who grew up in a small town, and there wasn't a lot going on. So I got into tinkering with computers and tech and taking things apart and putting things together like so many of us did. And so when I went to college, the natural path was to go into engineering. But I found that I really didn't like it, or at least didn't like the way that it was being taught. And so I was really fortunate to fall in with a group, actually in the journalism department. This was at University of Wisconsin, where I went, but it was fortunate to find a professor, and she had a grad student who were really interested in, this was sort of the early days of blogging and kind of just online publishing and online expression in general, right around that time, like late 90s, early 2000s, when that stuff was getting totally disrupted. And there was kind of this new sense of what was possible to do in terms of publishing and sharing information online. And just kind of springboarded from there into web design, development, writing. I ended up getting a degree in journalism. So, was sort of, had a chance to hone my writing and editing abilities. And that led me into a job at a startup in Chicago, FeedBurner, that some old timers might remember. And I did kind of, everything from product and marketing design and web development through sort of essentially product management. We didn't really have dedicated PMs, to even some customer support and just whatever needed to be done. I was one of the first employees there, so it was kind of the typical startup story. Then we were acquired by Google. That was 2007. We were acquired. I worked on some of Google's enterprise ad products in the Chicago office, and then moved out to the Bay Area and started working at YouTube, which had already been acquired by Google at that point. And I was part of the team that created the YouTube channels platform. So sort of when YouTube was going through that transition from like just being a website where you could make an account and upload a video to being this kind of real platform where you could build an audience and build a brand around a channel. And then I transferred yet again within Google to Google Ventures. And I say within Google, but GV was really set up from the beginning to be kind of an independent fund. It was funded solely by Google, or later Alphabet, but we wanted to compete against the Sequoias and Kleiners of the world. We didn't want to be sort of bucketed into the world of corporate venture capital. And so one of the things that we did to really try to stand out and be unique was establish this really strong operating team. And I was one of the first hires onto that team. I was in a role where basically I got to go inside all these cool companies after we invested. I got to work with Slack and 23andMe and Uber and One Medical Group and Flatiron Health, and all in all, close to 200 different companies. And
200 different companies, and that's over what range of time?
That was about 6 years. I spent 6 years at GV, and worked. So part of how I was able to do that was we developed this design sprint process, and that you mentioned the book Sprint, but it was really a way for us to kind of templatize and replicate the work that we were doing with companies. And because we had this model to sort of show up at a company where we didn't know anything and really work with them to help guide that team through the process of finding answers to whatever big questions they were struggling with, as opposed to us showing up and giving them the answers, trying to be the experts or whatever. But really, being more of a facilitator. Because we had that process, we were able to basically just jump from company to company and do it week after week. And so, some years, like I remember like 2014, 2015, we would run like 35 sprints, 35 like 1 week design sprints in a year. So it was essentially back to back, once you pull out kind of like holidays and buffer weeks and stuff like that. So that was, just a super amazing like learning experience for me. We ended up writing the book, which came out in 2016. I took some time off, did some traveling, and then the last like 18 months or so, I have basically been kind of focusing on the core of the work that I was doing at GV, like facilitating, coaching, consulting, doing some advising work, some angel investing, and it's been fun to sort of take the work that I was doing there and apply it in a lot of different contexts, so not just startups, but big corporate clients and nonprofits and universities. But I think especially like in the last 6 to 12 months, I've felt myself sort of pulled more and more strongly back into the world of startups. And it's been really cool to see like the community that's grown up around the design sprint process, and to have founders who say, hey, I ran design sprints when I was first starting my company, and I'd love to connect with you and see if I can get your help on something. So like sort of, I guess it's once you become known for doing something, you tend to get kind of pulled back into that thing. And in this case, I'm really happy to be sort of getting pulled back into the startup world and just have the opportunity to like talk to founders about how they can answer some of those big questions. Cause I know it can be scary and there can be a ton of uncertainty. So yeah, that's kind of my whole life story, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's a rich one and deserves to be explored. With regard to sprint, as you mentioned, there was a whole community around that book of people who love it. I did a sprint with my team earlier this year, and just when I said we're going to do a sprint, like people just like lit up. They're like, "Oh, I love sprint, love the book, and I can't wait for us to do this." So it's special, and it can be something you bring into all kinds of different organizations. As you said, you're spending more time with founders right now. I'm curious, what do you look for in the founders that you're choosing to spend time with?
I mean, I tend to be very methodical about how I do things. Perhaps it won't surprise you given the work that I've done. But I'll answer your question, but as context, a big part of the design sprint process, and actually something that I got some exposure to at GV was really kind of thinking about how to make decision processes as good as possible. So how to set up the structure and the process and the context for making high quality decisions, whether that's about what product idea or prototype to move forward with, or whether it's about an investment decision, which was the case at GV, or in the case of now, who do I want to spend time with? Who do I want to work with as an advisor or make an angel investment in? And so I actually have like a rubric that I use that has like different categories, and I keep it on I don't have it in front of me, but I keep it like on a little note card, and it's like stuck inside my notebook, and I keep it in front of my computer monitor, and I go through it. And so, I think like I can run through it really quick. I'll try not to get too detailed, but it's an acronym, and the acronym is OATS, OATS. So it's O is for opportunity. So it's really just about, what's the opportunity in the market? What's the problem being solved? And I really look for founders who have a sense of mission, because I think that your vision may change, or you may find that what you thought was going to be true in the future turns out to not be true. And I think founders who get too attached to their vision, often they get led astray by that vision. But on the other hand, I think it's really important to have a really strong sense of mission. And to me, that mission is tied to the opportunity. It's something that keeps pulling you, keeps you moving when things are crazy and things are difficult. So that's opportunity. I look for, what the approach is. I try to assess the approach of, does the product make sense? Does it seem high quality? Does the go-to-market strategy make sense? Like, I think I definitely used to fall into the trap earlier in my career of like, oh, if it's better, people will just want to use it. Especially as a designer, I was like, oh, this way that people do things is so annoying and bad and inefficient. If I can design a better version, then people are going to, they're just going to magically use it. But obviously that's not true. So I want to know that there's like a unique approach to reaching customers and acquiring customers. The T is for team. So that's, just about I touched on sort of mission versus vision. Obviously, skills. I want to work with people who aren't going to have to outsource all of the real work of making things happen. And this is tricky because there's a lot of great would-be founders out there who have some deep domain expertise, but I think if they're not, if they don't have the capability to do the work that's necessary to move forward, either themselves or in their co-founder, it's going to be really, really hard for them to learn at the rate that they need to learn. And that's not to say that everybody needs to know how to code or everybody needs to be a designer or anything like that, because, as you know, the tools now for building prototypes, for even building, sort of basic functional V1s with no code tools and stuff, like obviously the tools are better than ever. So it's not that they need to be an engineer, but they need to demonstrate this ability to hack stuff together and be moving forward, no matter how great their understanding of the space is. So those are some of the things on kind of the team or the individual, and then the S is for success so far. So it's really there just needs to be some inkling of I tested this with a couple people and they all loved it, or I've been writing a blog about this and people are going nuts for it, or I started this newsletter. It just needs to be some little spark or little inkling of success or progress. And anyway, that's my nerdy
that's really
for
helpful
evaluating companies.
Yeah, and I think on that S, the proof point, it can mean very different things to different investors at different stages.
Yeah.
Certainly, I wrote a blog post or I did something, shows a bias for action, and it shows that there's some receptivity. Depending on the stage, that looks, of course, so different across the landscape.
Yeah, and I think now is kind of a golden era for essentially you starting to validate business ideas through content or through community, even before building something. I'm working with a founder right now who's got, he comes from the world of pharmacy, and he's working on a business that's all around personalized health information. But his first step, the thing that I'm helping him with that he's doing first is basically kind of prototyping his vision for the product in the form of a newsletter. So instead of having this custom software that would do this personalized health information, he's going to offer a newsletter that sort of dissects some information that you see in the news about something that's going on with health, and then he's going to have the ability for people to pay to subscribe to be a premium subscriber, where he's going to manually go through and personalize the information to their situation. And
wow.
He's best thing that could happen is in a couple months, I can't keep up with, there's too many people for me to manually personalize every email. And he's and I know that doesn't scale, but that's for him, that's a thing that he can do to get started and start to validate. And I just think there's so many tools and so many new networks for exploring ideas in that way now, that I think it's really important to just see some of that success so far. Yeah.
So what you're essentially describing is just have a prototype. You don't have to build the perfect scalable version of the product right away. And that discipline of prototyping is of course a big part of design. And I guess can prototyping and design in general be a good tool for founders to be using and for all of us to be using to manage this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that we have adopted, and I say we meaning, the tech community, the sort of world of tech entrepreneurship. I think that we have adopted inadvertently kind of a bit of dogma or orthodoxy around what it means to prototype, or what it means to build your MVP. There's a very specific picture that people have in mind when they talk about that. And I think that in some cases, for some kinds of businesses, that is the right, having this sort of minimal feature set of a functional live product that's built on production code that's in the market. In some cases, that's the right thing to do, but I don't think it's the only first thing to do. And in fact, I think there's a lot of things that you can do in like a couple of days, whether it's a clickable prototype or whether it's the marketing for your product, or whether it's, you know, content or community that you're building around a particular opportunity or an idea. I just think, you know, as a designer and as somebody who's worked with so many companies, I don't really view design as it's not the output, it's not the end of some process. You know, it's hard to say, oh, that thing is well designed. I think a better way to look at it is design is the process that you go through. And one of the essential tools of design and one of the essential mindsets is, how can I very quickly create a prototype of this idea? What can I do quickly to make sure that there's legs here? And so I think that there's this part of the art of doing, you know, scary new things, building new products, new companies, is like understanding like that matching between, for this question or this unknown, what's the kind of product or what's the kind of prototype that I need to make to answer that question. And, you know, I think that founders who sort of have that fluency and have that grasp of how to be really nimble in matching those things, they're just able to move so much more quickly, and they're able to learn things so much more quickly.
Yeah, try stuff, learn stuff, do it a little bit faster, keep iterating. Yeah. No, that's true. And I think that was what was very eye-opening for people with the book Sprint, is that notion that, you know, within a few days I can try this. And particularly for myself included, coming from a more traditional product design background, where you might spend a lot more time getting deeper into the ethnography of your customer, and then you know, taking slightly waterfall approaches before you start seeing something real come together. The express version of that can actually like laser focus on what you want to do. And so for folks who aren't familiar with the book Sprint, we'll have a link in the little profile and description below the video, so that you can go to the Sprint website and learn more about exactly what we mean with this like process that happens over a few days.
Yeah.
You know, when we think about like startups, you know, and how they were using the Sprint process, I guess one thing that's worth clarifying is, when you were at GV, what stage would those companies typically be in terms of like product versus scaling? Were they refining a product? Like, and then, you know, where do you see the other stages where it could be applied?
Yeah. When I first joined GV, which was in 2011, the firm was only 2 years old. So started in 2009, I joined in 2011. And I think we had like 50 portfolio companies already at that point. But they were pretty early stage. Like, we were doing a lot of seed investing in those early years at GV. And one of the companies that comes to mind for me as sort of a perfect example of how to how to use the design sprint at a super early stage to help answer big questions is Digit. And I'm sure some of your audience will know about Digit. It's the tool that connects to your bank account and determines how much money you can afford to save. So really, it helps people who know they should be saving, setting aside some money every month, but really struggle to do it. And I knew the founder, Ethan, just kind of through the design startup community in San Francisco. And we ended up investing in Digit in their seed round. And then I got to work with Ethan and with his team, which I think was just like 5 people at that point, with a couple of design sprints. And what we did with them was basically, they had been hacking on a prototype, it was sort of a functional kind of, beta version of the product itself, and making sure that the like sort of rudimentary AI that sort of monitored when money was coming in and going out, like making sure that it wasn't going to overdraft the account or whatever. But they hadn't really given a ton of thought to the launch strategy. They hadn't really, they knew that they had something there, and they had a collection of beta users who were finding it valuable, but they hadn't really thought about how they're going to launch this and how the messaging is going to be and what the onboarding is going to be. And so we did a sprint with them to figure out a bunch of those things and really get into like, how do you get somebody to trust a totally new product they've never heard of with their bank login, for example, and just like all these like objections that people would have, and then how do we address those objections proactively? So that's super early stage, but then as GV got bigger and bigger and the fund sizes got bigger and bigger, necessarily we started moving later and later stage. And I had a little bit of, I had a question or concern about whether the design sprint process would be as useful at those later stages. And I found that it was, because like when you're building a startup, like even if you're at late stages, the questions never go away. Like they might be different questions, but you still have plenty of questions. I mean, as long as you're trying to do new things, there's going to be unknowns. That's just the nature of building new stuff. And so an example of that is like working with Slack. I think GV invested in their Series C, maybe, but they were already, like rocket ship growth, like doing super, super well. But they were kind of at this turning point where a lot of their early customers were other tech companies, where there was a level of sort of understanding of, okay, we get what Slack is. It's a chat room. Like we've used things like this before, but now they were at this precipice where it was like, okay, time to go sell Slack to the rest of corporate America and like get, law firms and like newspaper editorial offices and like all kinds of businesses to sign up. And so we worked with them, doing some design sprints to help them kind of figure out, how do you go to market, differently for that category of customer than you had been doing before. And then of course we've seen like, since the book came out, we've seen all sorts of huge corporates and all sorts of big organizations embracing the design sprint. So, I think as long as you're doing something that that's going to be really tough to execute, where there's a lot of uncertainty involved, then having a process to sort of methodically identify the challenge, capture solutions, rapidly prototype, and test. As long as you have like an approach to do that, I think that it's useful kind of throughout any stage.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, certainly within our accelerator, we're used to working with folks on topics like customer discovery and how to think about growth and so forth. That those are tools and disciplines in of themselves. The process of design and then the moments at which you want to like deal with unknowns never go away. And so I think that's a good thing for folks to internalize and be ready to do again and again.
Yeah, you kind of go through these loops where you go through these really intense periods of uncertainty where you're like, we don't know what to do. Like we have plenty of ideas, but we don't know which one's going to work. And then you get maybe like a little bit of like, you coast for like a little while because you're like, okay, we figured that out. But then it's like very quickly, it's like, okay, next unknown, next question. Like now we got to figure this thing out. Okay, let's crank and figure that out. Okay, we're good for like a couple of weeks. Oh, what's the next thing? And so like maybe those moments get spread out a little bit as you get to later stages. But yeah, when you're just starting out, when you're at seed stage or pre-seed stage, that's like your whole life. It's intense, but it's fun.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely fun. I want to switch gears and talk about another book, talk about Make Time. So my copy of Sprints, I lent to someone before the pandemic, and then who knows if I'll get that back. But I do have my copy of Make Time handy. And it's been a great book to return to as we're in a particular time in all our lives where we feel very starved for time and starved for energy and have a number of competing demands. And so with that, I'd like to really ask you about, how you wrote the book, to certainly to get people to create more time and be effective when it comes to the things that matter. How did you come to write that and decide to write this? Because it's a very different kind of book than Sprint.
Yeah, it is very different. It's for individuals, not for teams. It's sort of like a cookbook. Like it has a whole bunch of stuff that you can kind of look through and try, as opposed to Sprint is like Sprint is like a single recipe, and Make Time is like a whole book of recipes. But the philosophies are pretty compatible. And I think that really our motivation, and I wrote both books with Jake Knapp, who was one of my partners at Google
Right.
Ventures and is one of my good friends, and we still work together today. But I think a big part of our inspiration was like we would run these design sprints with companies, and we'd say like, that was an amazing week. Like that was intense for sure, but it was amazing because everybody had this sense of focus, this sense of purpose, clarity. We knew what we were doing and why it mattered. And then we'd like go back to our like, normal jobs, and it would just be like complete madness of like emails and back-to-back meetings and just, all that stuff. And so we're like, is there anything we can take from these really special, really focused moments we're getting in sprints and apply that to everyday life? And that kind of became the basis for Make Time. So like one of the big ideas that we took from the sprint process is to sort of choose for each day, like what's the most important thing you're going to do that day. And we call it a highlight. And it sounds kind of dumb. It sounds really simple, but it actually makes a huge difference. And it was something we did in design sprints where we'd say like, okay, like Thursday, all we're doing on Thursday on a design sprint is building our prototype. Like that's the only thing that matters. And so if you can say in your everyday life, like, what is the thing that matters most to me today? Like, is it doing this interview? Is it meeting a friend for coffee? Like whatever that thing is, like identifying that can really give a sense of kind of clarity and structure to the day. I think
And it doesn't have to be a deliverable, right? It doesn't mean,
totally.
okay, I shipped off this this deck, or we upload, we did this release of our a product. It's an activity, right?
Yes, and sometimes it is deliverable. Sometimes it is something very productive. Other times it's not. For me, I like to go through cycles where I do a few days of sort of really focused. There's specific things I want to get done, but then I might have a couple of days where I'm still working, I'm still doing things, but like maybe my highlight is something else, something in my personal life. We also saw like in design sprints that we would work essentially without distraction. Like we wouldn't have it, like people weren't really like on their computers or like checking stuff while we were working. We're like, that's amazing, like that in and of itself. And so in the book, in Make Time, we like give a bunch of suggestions for ways that you can like kind of sort of retake control over what you pay attention to. So you're not just like reacting to whatever notification appears, or like keeping your email open like all day long and just sort of like jumping on top of the first thing in the list.
That's awesome. And as I recall from the book, Jake worked on Gmail itself, right? So so as long as he says it's okay to like close your email down and like do other things, and must be fine. We can all not have that sense of FOMO that I think is pervasive.
Yeah, totally. And I think like, I mean, every time I talk about this stuff, there's people in the audience who say, that's nice, but like, let's be realistic here. And so, I don't think we can all just sort of like magically say, oh, I'm not going to pay attention to my email. But I think the underlying idea is valuable and important, which is that when you're doing something, be focused on doing that thing and take it seriously. And so I have days where email is what I'm doing. I mean, I have catch-up days, where I'm just like spending the day like on administrative stuff, on email, cranking through things. I'll go through periods where, for one reason or another, I've got a ton of meetings, where it's like much more in sort of a rapid fire like period. And if that's what I'm doing, if that's what's important to me at that phase, I'm going to focus on doing that stuff. It doesn't mean that every day needs to be this beautiful, Zen moment of like, email closed, meditating. Like it's really about sort of just directing your focus and being intentional. Because I think too often, because, the things like email and other tools are so, they're so pervasive, and obviously like especially now during the pandemic when we're spending all day on screens, they're just right there, they're one click away. Like I think that too often we fall into this trap of where we're not really doing anything 100%. We're doing like maybe like 5 things 20%. A bunch of windows are open or a bunch of tabs are open or whatever. And so really the core philosophy of Make Time is just about sort of identifying what that thing is that you really want to make time for, that you really want to focus on, and then setting up your environment to be able to spend time on that.
I think that is a really important takeaway for a lot of us, regardless of what we're doing, is to like create an environment where we can do that. And working from home with, family or members around us with whatever has broken a lot of that.
Yeah.
So, this is, I think, nothing that presents a silver bullet. As you said, it's a set of recipes, right?
Yeah.
And for those of us who need really high productivity, out of our days, uh, the time has come, I think, to not just set aside distraction, but to just like really like drill down into doing these things in such a way. So I'd really encourage people to check that out, and we'll have a link in the description too on Make Time, and I highly recommend for folks to check that out. Incidentally, is there anything you would update in a COVID edition for Make Time?
I don't know if I would necessarily update anything, but I think I might change the emphasis a little bit. So a couple of the ideas that have really, that we've heard from a lot of people that have really resonated during the pandemic have been this idea of choosing a daily highlight. So, I think we're all getting a bit better at dealing with this, life as we know it today, as, versus like in April, it was just like super, super crazy and overwhelming.
Fight or flight mode all day, every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so now, of course, people are still struggling in a lot of different ways, but I think, in general, we know what we're dealing with now to a certain extent. But we've heard from a lot of people throughout that like their days can kind of feel like a blur. And so the highlight is something that has really worked well for people. One thing that's actually been super well received, particularly for families, not with super little kids, but with somewhat older kids, is this idea of making a plan for the day and making a schedule for the day, either for yourself or for your family. And Jake was actually talking about this a few times, how he and his wife and their two sons would sit down in the morning and like plan out the whole day and say like, all right, who's got this going on at this time? Who's got a call? Who's got a meeting? Who's like going to go walk the dog? Like just sort of plan it all out, because I think it just gives us a chance to think proactively about what we're going to spend time on and how we're going to navigate some of the frictions that might come up when we're all sharing space, instead of waiting until we're in that moment and then just sort of reacting or freaking out or getting frustrated or whatever. And then the final one.
I love that idea of a family stand-up.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And the final one that I would probably emphasize a bit more in the COVID edition of Make Time is just like, and we talk about it quite a bit in Make Time, but it's to really like drive home like how important it is to take care of yourself, like your whole body and your mind, because like, with sort of limited opportunities to go out and do stuff and like, just being more sedentary and like not having access to gyms and stuff like that. Like, I think it's easy to just like spend 12 hours sitting in front of a computer and like snacking and like not really, doing those things that sort of make us feel good and energized. And I think it, especially if we had previously constructed a routine, we had a set of habits and a lifestyle that worked for us in that realm, for that stuff to then get kind of blown away and now have to like recreate it. I just think it takes sort of like a level of intention and proactive thinking to make sure that we're prioritizing our health and our energy, because otherwise the defaults, like the easy thing, the path of least resistance, is not going to make us feel good. It's going to make us feel tired, stressed, overwhelmed, burnt out, which is then going to just make everything else harder and everything else worse.
That's true. It's so easy to think if I just grind at this particular moment, I'm doing the right thing. But being able to have that refresh is super helpful.
Yeah, totally.
And then I want to close by asking you a little bit about your move from the Bay Area back to your home state of Wisconsin, and would love to ask you about what you're observing in that ecosystem. And if you see any similarities or contrasts back to life in the Valley.
Well, mostly contrasts, as you can imagine. Like the tech ecosystem here is, and I live in Milwaukee, and so there's the biggest city in the state, and there's a lot of people here starting companies, and there's VC firms, and there's big companies who are hiring engineers and stuff, and there's also a bunch in Madison. But in general, I mean, it's nowhere near what I was used to in the Bay Area, and it's nowhere near, and just in terms of the volume, there's nowhere near like what you see in New York or LA, and those are all bigger cities, so that's to be expected to some extent. But I think that Wisconsin has like historically been a place where the economy was very much based on manufacturing and on sort of these like really stable long-term businesses, and so that's kind of baked into the psyche. And so what I've been seeing is that there's a lot of interest, which is really good, and it's across the board. It's like there's people here who are super interested in like starting companies. There's like investors who are really interested, whether they're located here or not. There's people who are interested in investing in the Midwest. There's big companies who like see an opportunity to hire distributed tech teams. There's a lot of like there's organizations and governments who are sort of like trying to like make things happen. But to be totally frank, it's not quite clicking yet. I think that there's a lot of people who have done a lot of great work, and I'm like really grateful that they have been on that path, and I'm excited to like be joining them on that path. But I think we just haven't seen the kind of spark of building an ecosystem here that a lot of other places have seen. So it's early days. It's ground floor, but I also think we have some advantages, like the fact that we've got like really low cost of living. We've got a really easy pace of life. The fact that, because of the pandemic, it's more and more possible to work remotely and to be located anywhere. Like, I personally, in addition to me and my wife, we have a, I don't know, handful of friends who have moved here, who work in tech, like from the Bay Area, from like Seattle. And like, if those people stick around and, they think about what they're going to do next, like that just kind of seeds the sort of next generation of potential entrepreneurs and potential founders. So it's definitely, definitely still nascent, but it's exciting to like sort of be on the ground floor of the ecosystem here.
That's super exciting for us. At 500, we believe in certainly the spread of entrepreneurship, of innovation, and like startup growth all over the world. And yeah, we certainly see that ecosystems need to exist for that to be the case, and that involves attracting talent, developing folks who are there with the right like knowledge and expertise that you can connect to now so much easily and so much faster from around the world, and of course finally the capital part as well. So exciting to see that like starting to take shape, as you said, and so glad you're playing a role in that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like all the pieces are here. And if anything, maybe they just haven't all been totally connected in the right ways or enough, but the pieces are here. I mean, there's great accelerator programs, there's great universities, there's great investors, there's big companies who are investing a lot. So yeah, so it's exciting. And I totally agree with the mission. I think like entrepreneurship is just such a powerful way to make things better, to serve people, to help people, to create new value, to create wealth. And I think it's easier now than ever to start a business. And as we talked about earlier, the tools that exist today and the access to information and resources and education about how to do things that have never been done before is just so far beyond what we've had in the past that it's a pretty exciting time despite all the other challenges in our world.
You're absolutely right, and that I think is the highlight of this whole conversation, which has been probably the highlight of my day. So thank you so much, John, for making the time and sharing with us and showing us I think a couple of different disciplines and approaches that we can all bring into our lives. So thanks everyone for joining us, and appreciate the opportunity to kind of have this conversation with everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.